Okay, thank you.
Greetings and welcome to the Monday, June 8th, 2026 meeting of the Advisory Commission on Policing of Montgomery County. We call this meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. Please mute your microphone unless you are speaking. Any guests in attendance should introduce themselves in the chat, listing their organization affiliation, if any, and providing their contact information. To ensure that we have adequate time to hear from all commissioners, guests are asked not to speak during ACP meetings, apart from invited guest speakers, though they are welcome to add their thoughts in the comments in the chat. All right. Uh, has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from the May meeting, the draft of May? Are there any corrections? Can we approve by common consent? If so, someone say so moved.
So moved.
All
Scary.
right. Thank you. Let's now go into our subcommittee updates. Uh, Sonny, you're up front with the data subcommittee.
Yeah, so we got a response back from the police department, as mentioned by Francisco, about not that they are reluctant to provide information about some sensitive databases. So I'm working with Susan. Susan is trying to help us find ways of connecting with them and probably working closely with them. Maybe not for the whole subcommittee, maybe a few individuals in the subcommittee, or come up with other options where we can get this information. The other thing that we are also actively working on is to get involved with the new system that they're building. The current system has a lot of limitations. So we wanted to work with them closely to align with to understand their new requirements, and how we can help in this in producing in the requirements for the new system, right? So that's all I have from my side.
Thank you, Sonny. Any questions or thoughts for Sonny? All right. If not, we'll move on to the compliance and police reform subcommittee. Eva, you're up front.
Sure. So we're still sort of in a holding pattern, awaiting a response for the police department. As far as I know, and you can correct me on this, Susan, if I'm wrong, we had reached out to the department asking to meet with some folks there on a Friday in July. As far as I know, we've still not received a response.
So I'm trying to firm up, sorry, I'm getting weird pop-ups. I'm trying to firm up the 31st with both of the people that would be involved. So let me circle back around and make sure.
Okay, great. That's our only major update. And we will keep folks posted as that meeting develops.
All right. Thanks a lot. Any questions for the compliance subcommittee or thoughts? All right. We move on to school safety. Terry, you're up front.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. The school safety committee, I did not call a meeting. I worked and really kind of proofread the annual report. I want to give a shout out to Francisco. After that gets through the pipeline, I will readdress bringing the group together. We have some good articles that we want to take a look at, and then we can come up with a document. But the past month was working on the annual report for myself, Francisco.
Okay. Any questions or thoughts for the school safety subcommittee? If not, we go to the pretrial release subcommittee. Henry, can you give us an update?
Sure. I was consulting with, conferring with the person who had the lead in this, Cherry. I sent her, I tried to speak with her this evening, email. I don't know if she's on tonight, but we, on the 13th, we sent out the findings from number 7 of that work plan, the pretrial release. And it actually was probably from the last iteration of the ACP. I don't know if it was taken off, but it was pretty much a question that was asked, and from the information that Cherry got from a former state's attorney's office, it's been asked and answered. And I was waiting to see whether whether this part of the work plan should be, that was one of the issues, whether it should be removed from it. But this is a type of a recurring issue in police departments. So I had some reservations. I thought maybe to just remain open and to investigate how these things go. It's a recurring interest in police departments. But I wanted to weigh in on Sherry to perhaps we'll have to wait until the next meeting.
Okay. Or if she, Susan, was she one of the persons who said she may not be here?
No, I have not heard from her yet. So
Yeah, so she may likely still log in. So maybe when we get to the end, we can come back. All right. So we are now at old business. First up, we have the work plan. Susan, I see Logan isn't on. Are you able to share the draft on the screen?
I'm sure going to try.
All right. Well,
Hold on a
I
second.
checked. I'm disabled. So
Work plans. Is this the correct? Oh, what has happened to my thing?
yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, it's all disappeared for me. Okay.
Can you make it a little bigger so I don't have to use the bifocals?
It's not even showing up for me.
Oh, you don't see it?
Nope.
It's there.
Can you guys see it? Can everyone see it?
Yes.
Draft 2020.
It's there. The writing is just small.
Yeah.
I wonder why you can't see it.
I don't know.
I don't know who that is, but will you please mute your phone if
Okay.
your TV is playing in the background?
This was circulated by email, correct?
Yes. And I
Yeah.
circulated it again just about half hour ago.
Okay,
Thank you.
so we may have to work without the screen share. If you can't see it to
Why this is-
navigate it, right? No.
I don't even know how to, hold on. Let me try it. Let me stop it and try again.
Okay. Well, you know what? While you're doing that, we see that Sherry has arrived. So, Sherry, we just finished our subcommittee updates, and so Henry gave us some information. But do you have any anything to share on the pretrial release subcommittee? Cherie?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. Sherry.
No, I don't have anything to share. I talked to someone who was formerly with the state's attorney's office. He's retired. He confirmed that our information was accurate about the initial charging decisions, and that the state's attorney's office does not have a role in like 95% of those initial charging decisions. And of course that triggers, a bunch of other stuff. And they have indicated that there's a manual that the commissioners, I keep wanting to call them magistrates, but the commissioners follow, and that essentially they're supposed to stick to the manual. But that personally didn't give me a whole lot of confidence, but it is a statewide issue, right? It's not just Montgomery County. And so I think that that it may be not a bad idea to reach out to I don't know, the someone in the legislature to say, hey, look, we think this impacts the the reforms that you all were attempting to do with in creating a number of, well, we think this may impact the look of criminal justice in Maryland. And you know, I don't know what y'all think, but we may we think that this kind of deserves some clarity. If people are getting charged, you know, right now there's a whole big push for expungement on a whole bunch of stuff, but you know, instead of expunging records, maybe we oughtn't to be creating so many records. So that's where I think we left it. I mean, I didn't, you know, I think we left it with the following. Yes, the information we had is accurate. And because that was what we were asked to determine. So we determined that in fact was true. And where and what you all may want to do as a response to that is up to you. Maybe just including it in the annual report as, you know, something we found, you know, making a recommendation. I don't know. But the information, our charge was to determine whether or not that information was accurate. And we did determine that information was accurate.
All right. Thank you so much. So how should we proceed, Francisco? You're
Sorry.
muted.
Sorry. I have a question. I'm just not sure I understand what the issue is. And I know this is an item that is a follow-up from the previous, from the APC, from our previous commission. But, you know, maybe I'm just slow and I don't understand what the issue is here, and what is the problem? I just don't know.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, so our charge, the ACP, is to review policies and practices of the police and determine whether or not we think there's a need for reassessment of those policies and practices. Is that accurate to say? Okay. So one of the policies and practices involves charging decisions and how charging decisions are made. Okay. When someone is arrested, the person is then taken to this commissioner, and the police officer makes a statement regarding the facts and suggesting charges. The commissioner then actually enters the charges, and so that becomes like the record of, Jane Smith was arrested and these are the charges. Okay. Now the state's attorney could very well look at those charges and say, we're just missing all this stuff, but you still got a record, Jane Smith. So now part of the issue for me is that the state's attorney is not involved, and the commissioners are not required to be lawyers. Okay. They're not required to have a legal background. They are required to have, they do training classes, and they are supposed to comply with this manual that they have. That is better than it was, but for me the question becomes, if I'm Jane Smith and I've been charged with some stuff I can't get expunged, what I'm supposed to do now? Because any employer can look me up and see that I was charged with this stuff. They'll also see that I was dismissed, but they're gonna wonder why I got charged. And so this is, to me, this is something that we in our capacity cannot resolve. But, you know, sometimes it's good to make people aware of things that impact the criminal justice system, that impact policing practices. But we are not empowered to change any of that.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Cherie. So from my perspective, I see that very closely that one, that if the commissioners do not follow the manual closely, then we have the possibility for, you know, people being treated differently, and so that's a potential problem. I also see the issue that you raised, that if someone the commissioner decides that they should be charged with something, but the state attorney says, you know, that this is ridiculous, that is still part of the public record. And so that presents a potential problem. It seems to me, and I agree with you, that we need to do more work on this. And maybe continue working on it and keep it as part of the work plan.
Right. I agree. Thank you for explaining it so clearly, Sherry. You also mentioned us adding it into our annual report.
Yeah, my thinking was that we could just, you know, say, hey, look, we looked into this and this is what we found.
Yeah.
And, you know, either we're gonna continue to look into it, or we think that this is an issue somebody else ought to take up. I don't know. But I think we should make note of it.
Absolutely. We definitely shouldn't ignore it. I agree that we should add it in our annual report, and maybe we should at least document it and write a letter. Henry, you put a question in the chat. Do you want to share it out loud?
Yeah, from that manual that Sherry's talking about, I wanted to know whether we within our committee can get a copy of that manual to see the training manuals, exactly what they are taught or instructed to do in their job.
I don't know the answer to that. I was, you know, fiddling around on the internet, and I did find many references to the manual and the training classes. But I didn't go looking for the manual. I'm happy to go looking for the manual. I can't imagine that it's not public record in some regard. But I personally have never seen it.
All right. So
that should be part of our committee. We should have that if this committee is continuing on. We should at least have the same materials that the others are utilizing.
Okay. So Terry's in the chat. She agrees that we need to put it in our plans. Do you want to say more, Terry, or was that sufficient? All right, Sean, your hand is up.
Yeah, very quickly. I don't really have much of a voice, but as far as the manual is concerned, I'm gonna err on the side that it's probably unlikely, unless you're an attorney, that you're gonna be able to get access to that manual. But secondly, I think we still have two things that we need to consider. The part about the commissioner is salient and it's important, but even if you jump that hurdle, what is the, I guess, position on how you then attack the arrest? Because this whole exercise starts with the arrest. It starts with the police officer. It starts with whatever charging documents that they initiate, which then goes to the commission. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It does.
Very good. Yeah.
So just that so that we have some movement here, we definitely need to put this in our work plan. We'll take a quick vote just to make sure that that's a slam dunk. But I think the committee, maybe you can do some more research on to whom we would address a letter saying we've done this research and we have this major concern. Can we have more dialogue? Right? And maybe we can invite someone at some point to come and share. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. All right. So can we get a motion that we will add the concerns expressed by this subcommittee to our report, our annual report?
So moved.
Second.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? All right, motion carried. Thank you so much. Susan, we can go through the work plan without the screen share if we have to. Were you able to work on it or no?
Let me try again and see what happens because I made it bigger on my computer.
Sean, your hand is still up. Are you trying to say more?
I think it's on 10, 12, 15.
Okay.
Is that better?
Sorry.
Much better. Can you see it?
No, but I can see it on a different screen that I have.
All right. So
just tell me to scroll up or down.
Wait, go back to the top and then scroll just a little bit at a time. Okay. All right. So first, before we go into, does anyone have any fresh thoughts or concerns, having received the draft ahead of time, that you'd like to share or discuss? All right. If not, Susan, just go down a bit so we can see the first paragraph. Okay, stop there. So I guess with this second paragraph, I guess this is past tense because we have had an update. So we would change the language there a bit, right?
Yeah, no, actually, Brian, this is the memo, the cover memo to the work plan. And so, yes, you're right. So basically, what we have is in strategy number 7. The question is whether we need to leave it as it is, review the role of the police in the probable cause and pretrial release decisions of district court commissioners, or just to say maybe continue reviewing. Because it's already in the work plan. So the question would be to whether we need to modify the language, just say continue reviewing. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. All right. I push it back to the ACP. Do we keep, modify, or delete strategy 7?
Strategy 7 being to evaluate the role of the police in the probable cause and pretrial release decisions.
Francisco. So I think for this, we would need to have a copy also of the work plan so that we can be clear on what strategy 7 is, right?
Yeah.
I can scroll down.
Okay.
Is it the role of police or is it the role of the district court commissioners?
Review the role of police and the probable cause and pretrial release decisions of district court commissioners.
Well, it's actually how it integrates with the commissioners, right? So that has a direct impact. That's where I was thinking. It is directly connected. So I think we need to be mindful of our role, but also it's such a direct connection. We can't ignore it either.
Right.
And I think, staying within the ACP's clear directive, we I personally have no idea how the police officers are trained on this, on the representations they make. What kind of instruction are they given? Are they, are they asked to, put every possible charge? I mean, we don't know that, and that their training in this regard, I think, plays a role here. And I see Susan has asked about whether or not we want to meet with the retired judge who trains them, but that's kind of, that's not institutional, right? That's not institutional. My concern is the institutional impact of what these training materials may do, how it may, instruct them. I mean, that's, to be honest, that's the manual that's really relevant to our work. But I don't know if, meeting with the person who's actually doing the training is necessarily going to be instructive for us. Because they could, they could hire somebody else tomorrow. Then what we gonna do? So it's more the institutional and systemic impact, of that training thing.
Mm-hmm.
Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree totally with Cherie, but for the purpose of our current conversation, which is the work plan, I think is we leave pretty much the same, and I trust that both Cherie and Henry, and with Sean's help and everybody else's help, to do the right thing on this and come up with a good recommendation to do the additional work that needs to be done. How it needs to be done, I leave it up to them. But for the purpose of the conversation, we just need to make sure that this item is kept. This strategy is kept in the work plan.
Agreed. Susan, can you go back to the top, please?
Yep.
Or at least to that second paragraph where we were. Okay, let's go back.
Whoops.
And just so that,
go back up.
Yeah, to provide a context for.
I'm sorry, a little more. Okay, stop there. Okay, go ahead, Francisco.
Yeah, just the context. This is a memo providing recommendations to the ACP regarding the work plan. So yeah. we got the review, we got the update, and now we're deciding whether to keep it as is or with modifications. And my recommendation would be that we keep it with a minor modification to reflect that work is ongoing.
Will you make that a motion, please?
I would like to make a motion to keep strategy number 7, the work plan, with the modification that to read, continue reviewing the role of police.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposition? Henry, are you abstaining?
No.
I mean, are you opposing? You're with it?
No,
Okay.
that was from the previous.
Okay.
Delayed reaction, slow motion.
All right. Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Let's go to the next consideration. Decide whether to create a standing committee to review MCPD's newly published 2026 through 2030 strategic plan, or delete strategy 3 from the 2026 work plan. So can we go down to strategy number 3? And Francisco, I assume you have some feedback on this also.
Yes. So we have in the work plan, we had an item related to getting involved in reviewing MCPD's strategic planning processes. And we have not been able to do much on it. MCPD has developed a strategic plan that covers from 2026 to 2030. And so my thought is that we either establish a planning committee to focus on this particular document, or that we consider dropping the specific strategy. If we think that it's just not worth it, or that we can't do it, then just drop the strategy from the work plan so we can focus more on finishing elements of our work plan that we can do. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's clear. Eva?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really valuable to review the work or the strategic plan for the police, just because that is how they're setting out goals for the next 5 years. And especially, even if it's not us, but the next iteration of the commission will have the opportunity to help shape MCPD's adherence to those goals and those priorities. At the same time, given the responsiveness of the department over the past 2.5 years, I am not entirely sure the extent to which we can affect any changes or any follow through on this strategic plan. So I think that is a factor in a way, but overall, I think even just having a subcommittee that reviews the strategic plan and reports back on it to the rest of the commission so that someone has done that in-depth reading and we don't all have to, I think would be very valuable. And it'll give us context for anything MCPD does over the next 5 years. So that'll benefit the next iteration of the commission as well.
Right. Sherry?
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I haven't read their strategic plan. I don't know what it says, but I don't know what kind of deliverables, or goals that they've made for themselves. Those things are incredibly important because it does indicate budgetary stuff that's coming down the pipe. Okay, so, or at least it should. There should be some alignment. So yeah, I think it would be good to at least have a subcommittee that reviews it, and to have somebody who ever put it together with the MCPD actually come and maybe have a chat with us after we've had an opportunity to review it, and maybe have some questions about whatever's there. And if we have any questions, we can just say, boy, this is great, thank you. I mean, so yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile.
All right, anyone else? Okay, so do we need to change the language on strategy 3, or do we leave it alone?
I think we should change it because we should just specifically focus on the strategic plan.
Wait, Susan.
Does that make sense?
Wait.
So, Ava, so you would want the language to say access, evaluate, and provide feedback on the Montgomery County Department of Police strategic plan for 2026 and 2030?
I think so. I think
Okay.
just because that narrows the focus and it's specific and targeted to what we're actually going to do. The other thing we could also say is access, evaluate, and provide feedback on MCPD planning processes and specific goals, objectives, and outcomes by analyzing or whatever, by reading and summarizing, whatever word we want to use, the
Okay.
strategic plan.
So
I mean-
I'm concerned that we could be leaving something critical that's outside of the 2026 2030 plan if we're only going to review that, although that should encompass a lot. But are there things outside then that we would miss?
And that's a good point. And the language right now doesn't limit us to the Montgomery County MCPD's strategic plan. I mean, I'm comfortable with either iteration, either focusing on just with particular emphasis on the Montgomery County MCPD strategic plan, or leaving it as it is.
So let's take a vote so that we can move on. All right. So we have two options. We can leave the plan as is, which gives us the possibilities of focusing on the plan and anything outside of the plan, or we can vote on just focusing on the plan so that we can major in the majors, perhaps, for lack of a better term. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So two votes. First vote is let's start with majoring in the majors. Does anyone vote that we should just focus on the 2026 2030 plan? I keep saying 2030. All right, we have Eva. You need to either raise your hands or speak up. We got Henry. We got Cherie. Anyone else? Mr. Stevenson. Francisco.
Terry, yes.
Sean. Terry. All right. Did we get everyone? How many was that? I just called the names as I saw them.
I think that's 7.
All right. And then we would keep the language as is, which gives room to also consider other processes outside of the 2026-2030 plan. Any votes for that? I think, Sean, is your vote up for this second part, or is it still up from the last vote? Okay. So I'll vote for that one for keeping it more broad.
Okay.
All right. Are there any abstentions? Because we only have 8 persons who have voted. Any abstentions? Okay. Motion carries that we will change the language such that we are focusing. We're majoring in the majors. We're focusing only on the 2026-2030 plan. So we need to change the language there. All right.
Got it.
Can we go back to the top, please, Susan? Well, not the top, but I guess the third consideration. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Keep and consider creating a standing committee on strategy for community policing. Now, can we go down to strategy 4? Susan, considering you can't see the screen, you're doing a stellar job. Thank you so much. Stop. Okay. All right. Well, I guess my anxiety is helping when I scream stop 7 times, right? Okay. All right. So number 4, examine MCPD community policing outcomes to ensure that these efforts address the expectations of the community and incorporate community-centric approaches to build public trust and promote collaboration between the community and the community policing committee. All right, what are your thoughts on the decision to be made here?
And so if I, so the issue is, one, we had this element in this strategy in the previous work plan. We did not have a specific committee on it, and the question is whether we want to create a specific a specific standing committee to review and to put more emphasis on our review of community policing approaches that MCPD is doing. Now, MCPD in its public comments says that it is committed to community policing. What we know is that in a lot of police departments, they view community policing as primarily a public relations strategy. And the question that we may want to explore is does MCPD truly understand what community policing is? Are their strategies and policies truly in line with the concept of community policing? If we think that's a valid task, then we should consider establishing a community policing committee. And
Okay, thank you. All right, turn it back to the ACP. What are your thoughts? Should we establish a committee? Yes.
You know, can I say, here's part, to me, part of the problem, if not the major problem here, is definitional. You know, I don't know what their definition of community policing is. And it is subject to a lot of different interpretations. You know, it's kind of like somebody says blue, and whatever your favorite shade of blue is, that's what you're going to think of. So that doesn't give any definitional precision. And you really need definitional precision to determine whether or not the practices that have now been put in place align with the purported goals and objectives. So, and I think that we have not, I could be totally wrong, but I don't recall them saying, here is what we think community policing means, other than more outreach and engagement to the community. That's like, you know, saying, you know, water is wet and it quenches thirst. That doesn't really tell me very much, you know. So so I think more needs to be done. And if not community policing, because that's a whole nother, that is a strategy in and of itself, and it's like 30 years old. And so the question becomes, is this even like something that they should be doing now? I mean, you know, I think there are a lot of questions that should be asked about what community policing means to them, what they're doing to implement those things, what is their success rate, what do they consider success, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those things are really hampered by the fact that they don't really seem to have a definitional framework that is more than, you know, broad platitudes.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks, Cherie. We have Eva, then Terry.
Yes, sorry. I agree with what Cherie said about needing a definition of community policing. I think maybe having a community policing committee could help press them on that. I also think that since this is a strategy that has existed for a while, it would be good to get context on like if MCPD thinks that they've been practicing community policing this whole time, like if they're adopting this as a new strategy, that sort of thing. Like get context on what the department's relationship to community policing is. But I also think this committee could dovetail very well with the data committee, right? Because the whole point of community policing theoretically is that it's supposed to like prevent crime before it happens by picking out the minor stuff to prevent the major stuff, right? And so we would need to see, is MCPD taking that tack? And if so, what are the results? So I think it is a valuable investigation to do, but I also think that that could theoretically be a function of the data committee.
Okay, thank you, Eva. Terry?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to Eva. Agree with all the comments. This could be something that actually comes out of the strategic planning. So in theory, we know that there is a staffing shortage. We know that we want to figure out how to police better, smarter. So this can be coming out of the data committee or even the strategic plan examination. And my other comment, and I don't want to be a naysayer, but I want to make sure when we have all these subcommittees that they are appropriately functional, as well as how many we have on commissioners, how many subcommittees do we have. I think they're all valuable things that need to be done as a part of the mission and goal of the ACP, but I also want to be mindful of maybe this should be incorporated into something else. I just don't want to bite off more than we can chew.
I agree. We have to consider personnel. Absolutely. Okay, so we have in this order, Sonny, Henry, C. Arthur, and Francisco.
Yeah, so let me go first. So while the data committee can look at the outcome and how effective the community policing are, but the defining what is community policing and other things should not be in the scope of the data committee, right? Data subcommittee is supposed to examine data, provide recommendation. Okay, this is working or this is not. It's kind of a validation process. But definition of, okay, what is expected? How do you define community policing, like Sherry was saying, or what it should encompass of, that shouldn't fall in the purview of the data community.
Thanks. Henry?
Yeah, thank you very much. Community policing has been around for quite a while. I remember the first African-American police commissioner in New York City Police Department, Benjamin Wood, instituted that program, which many police departments around the United States thought that it was useful to have. And it usually incorporated having police live in the communities that they work, that they know different things about the community, that the community concerns, or specifically crime patterns. And I agree that this aspect is something that goes hand in hand with what the data committee was entrusted to do, and it gave rise later on during the police commissioner of Bratton, where you have crime stats, the CompStats meetings was important. So it's important for us to know what kind of information is being collected and from year to year changes. And I agree with Terry there that rather than break out another subdivision, this is something that the data committee should press on to the MCPD. And as we did last year, once again, request that they provide us with a compendium of databases every year. It's not like a one-off situation, so we can see what items are being added and what items are being subtracted. The litigation right now in some courts has that plate readers are not to be used for privacy concerns. And so this is an aspect that the community has brought up.
Yeah. So I just want to point out before we move on that if we push this to the data committee, it's important that they see this as a part of their purview, and they're willing to do the work. And it sounds like as what Sonny shared is they focus more on data and reporting from the data than digging into community policing. Am I interpreting you correct, Sonny?
That is right. That's at least how we have defined the current functionality of the data community.
Okay. All right. So we can come back to that. C. Arthur? You're muted.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In this instance, I think we need to know three things. One is what the definition is of community policing. The other one is how you're going to execute this? What is your means of execution of this? And the third is, do you have the means to do community policing from a personnel standpoint, and how and the means to set up is there an economical thing to set up means? Let's say if you have to set up stations in the community, certain places. So I think the important thing is to find out those three things.
Right. Thank you, C. Arthur. So as it pertains to the definition, Susan posted something in the chat that is helpful. She says on community policing, it can include problem oriented policing, solving problems in the community, partnerships with the community, proactive policing, and other ways of building trust. There is a lot of information on it in the recent patrol analysis workload report. So maybe, Sonny, a precursory step would be for the data committee to check out the recent patrol analysis workload,
Okay.
and to report from there, and then we can see if we want to do a subcommittee. However, the issue is we need to put something in our work plan. So keep in mind that that's where we are. And Francisco always redirects us when we go astray. So I'm sure he's going to offer something helpful, and then we'll go to John.
So we do have an item on community policing in the draft work plan. And we can leave it as it is. And then the only question would be whether we need to form a separate committee to look into this. And what we can do is just leave it as it is. And then at the next meeting, we can talk about forming specific committees, whether we want to do the community policing committee, a separate community policing committee, or whether we want to just focus, have this workload be performed, or at least part of the workload for this particular strategy be performed by the data committee. So we have a range of options, and I think the only really urgent item that we need to do now is decide whether we want to create a community policing committee, or whether we just want to, as part of the work plan that we approved today, or whether we just want to delete that, just leave that blank. In other words, just leave the strategy as it is, not mention a separate community policing committee, and defer that to see whether we can handle that specific workload. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. I want you to hold your thoughts. Let's get one final word from John, and then we'll come back. John?
Yes. I want to get clarity. I know Montgomery County has a community engagement. That's why I asked the question in the chat. Is this the same thing, or is this something totally different?
The concept of community policing is broader than that. And as you read MCPD documents, they put it at the top of their approach to policing. So it's it's almost like a philosophy to policing. It includes multiple strategies, as Susan mentioned, some of those strategies. And I think part of the issue that we're having in our own conversation is that different people interpret community policing differently. And we can provide, the ACP can provide some clarity to it by looking into the documentation that has been issued at the federal government level on community policing, defining it and detailing the types of strategies that police departments can apply to advance their goals of community policing.
Does that help, John?
No, because I know Montgomery County has the community engagement, and I had a problem with this before when I asked, because I had one young lady told me what community engagement was, and she gave a whole different definition. And then when I took the Citizens Academy, it was a whole nother definition. So I was wondering if they changed this terminology to mean community policing, or do they have community policing and community engagement? Are those two separate things?
I think that's one of the questions, that if we have a separate committee, or the ACP as a whole, we can look into this question and ask, and try to get answers and more clarity from NCPD. As Ava said, what is their concept of community policing? How are they applying it? I mean, we see it in their documentation all over the place, and the county council has emphasized the importance of community policing. And I'm afraid that we might all be talking past each other.
Well, it sounds like there may be some clarity in the recent patrol analysis workload report. So I want to recommend that we keep the language the same, and that we task the data committee to give us a report on the patrol analysis workload. And from there, we can decide if we are going to create a subcommittee. I don't know if someone's talking or if there's feedback. What say you?
So I could spend it right now. Went to the spa, got a massage.
Should we have a motion here? Like, get a motion. Should I make a motion to get clarity of definition?
Say that again. I'm sorry. There's a lot of feedback somewhere, and I'm trying to understand.
I think it's Francisco. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah. So, are we looking for a motion here?
Yeah, we can make a motion if there's no other conversation. I make a motion that we keep the language the same, that we charge the data committee to review the patrol analysis workload and give us a report. And from that report, we should have discussions on whether we would create a community policing subcommittee.
I second that motion, Terry.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposition? Any abstention? Motion carried. All right, Susan, can we go back to the top? And it looks like we just have small modifications here. Francisco, can you work us through the small modifications fairly stealthily?
Yes, and my apologies if you get more conversation than you need, but I am in a public space. It's the only place that I have available today to participate. So with that, we made a recommendation, and you can see it in the actual, if you look at the actual text of the work plan, you can see that in the goal, we added 3 words in the goal section that improve public safety and the delivery of fair and effective equitable policing. And the reason for that is just to put just to ensure that we understand that policing is part of the larger goal of public safety. If you want me to, I can just go on to the others.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Strategy number 1, and you see it highlighted in bold, including we added including through research and public outreach. This was to make sure that to underscore that the ACP does its own research, but we do the public outreach both in terms of the public forums, which are very important because we get direct input from the community, and from through the comments that we get through the website. And then strategy number 5, again, it's highlighted in bold. The data committee wanted to make sure that they're focused on the new record management system, automated record management system, was reflected in the work plan. And then number 6 is the last one, provide written recommendations. This was to highlight the fact that when the ACP speaks to the county council, which is our job, we only do so, we do it in writing. And so it's our letters. And that's the reason for that minor adjustment into the work plan. And that's it. Any
questions about the small modifications? If not, can we approve them by common consent? If so, will someone say so moved?
So moved.
All right, thank you. I don't think any action is necessary for what we're going to keep unchanged, is there?
No, and the only change that I have recorded is on the strategy number 3.
Susan, can you go to the bottom, please?
The bottom?
Yeah, can you bring it up some? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's page 4, strategy
Keep on
number
to page
3.
4. Sorry.
It will say access, evaluate, and provide feedback on MCP on the Montgomery County Department Police Strategic Plan for 2026-2030 Planning Committee. And then the other language change is continue reviewing the role of police. That's in strategy number 7. Continue reviewing the role of the police in the probable cause and pretrial release decisions. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Francisco. And also, so we're done with this point. You can undo the share, Susan.
Okay.
And thank you again for managing that for us. All right, so next we're moving on to 2026 annual report, and that was attached to our email. Are we voting on the annual report to send it forward tonight, or are we having discussion? We are voting on that tonight. Oh, wow. Okay, are there any questions or concerns concerning the annual report as we have it?
Brian, if I may also note, so what we did last year is we accepted we voted on approving the annual report with minor additions or minor changes to be made to reflect the decisions that are being made today. Because the report is due on July 1st. So the minor changes would be to reflect that we approved the work plan and we would attach the new work plan with the minor changes. And the results of the election of leadership for the ACP.
Very good. All right. Well, all in favor of moving the work plan forward with the additions, minor additions? Well, can we get a motion that we move it forward?
So moved.
I move that we move forward in approving the work plan, the annual report with the updates from today's meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carried. All right, now let's get on to the exciting part. Selecting ACP leadership for next year. For clarity, we're voting on a chair and co or vice chairs. Is that right, Susan?
Yes.
All right. Susan, can you share what the nominations are that are coming in writing to you?
Yes, the ones that I've received are Eva for chair and Francisco for co-chair, and he's happy to be a co-vice chair if somebody else wants to be a vice chair as well.
All right. So let's start with the chair. We have a written nomination for Eva Quitman. Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? All right, then shall we vote on the said name? It has been, Eva has been nominated, and she's the only nomination to be the chair of the committee moving forward. So I certainly hope she passes. Ready? All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Any opposition? Any abstentions? All right. Congratulations, Eva. All right. So the next nomination is for co-chair. So we have Francisco remaining as a co-chair. And let me just say about the two of them, this last year, they have been wonderful to work with. My first year, Cherie was wonderful to work with, having been in a previous iteration of the ACP. She was a very great support. And then this year, Eva and Francisco have been wonderful. Francisco especially has helped me in preparing for meetings and such. And so I just want to say thank you. It's been great working with you. And it's really been cool working with my neighbors to make sure that we are, giving the support and advisement necessary to our police officers to make sure that our community is safe and healthy and vibrant. And I look forward to remaining on the committee for my time and lending all the support that I can. Henry, is your hand up?
No, I'm sorry. Mhm.
Okay. So we have Francisco as a chair. Would anyone like to join him as a co-chair, or would anyone like to recommend another person to be a co-chair? Because I think it worked really well having 3 people last year. Would you agree, Eva and Francisco? Yeah. Cherie?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
And I guess this is really for Susan because I'm not 100% sure, but I think I come off of this commission in August. Is that right?
I think everybody was reappointed or the new commission iteration was like March.
Okay, because I know I'm term limited. I just really, for some reason, August is rolling around in my mind, and so I'm just trying to understand.
I'll check to confirm, but I think it was March.
Okay, thank you.
Cherie, are you asking because you're willing to be a co-chair?
No, I'm asking for clarity.
Right.
Purely for clarity purposes. I'm always willing to talk to people when they call me, but I got way enough on my plate right now.
Okay. John Stevenson, I would like to nominate you to be a co-chair. Do you accept? Yes. Okay, very good. All right, so we have for our co-chairs for the next year in nomination, we have nominated Francisco and John. Are there any other nominations? Going once, going twice? If you are in approve.
Can we just clarify for a second?
Yes.
Are they being nominated? Is John being nominated for co-chair or co-vice chair?
Co-vice chair, like you and Francisco were.
Okay, excellent.
Is that clear to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Any opposite? I mean, any abstentions? All right, motion carried. All right, thank you, everyone. All right, so let me finish my meeting and then I'll move over, Eva. All right. Okay. Is Christy on?
No, she couldn't make it tonight.
Oh, okay. Do we have any other information on this letter to the county council on the April virtual meeting? All right. So can we move that over then to July's agenda,
Yes.
I guess?
Yep.
All right. And then Chrissy was going to report on a social event, so she definitely needs to come to the July meeting. All right. Is there any other new business?
I just want to say, Brian, thank you for leading us this past year. I appreciate it. And thank you for being so gracious. And Eva and Francisco and John will be with you.
Here,
seconded to all of that. Brian, you've done an excellent job over the past 2 years.
Thank you all for trusting me and giving me the opportunity. And I look forward to continuing to serve with you. All right. All right. Can we get a motion to adjourn? You guys want to stay on? Okay.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next month, hopefully. Take care. All right.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.